In 1971, a candy bar cost 15 cents. Today, that same candy bar costs $2. You've heard this story before. You've probably told it yourself. But here's what nobody mentions. Your salary didn't go up 13 times. Your savings didn't multiply by 13. The candy bar did. And that gap, that silent gap between what things cost and what you actually have, that's not just inflation. That's theft in slow motion. Except there's no masked robber, no broken window, just a system working exactly as designed. The question isn't whether inflation affects you. It does. The question is why it hits you first, harder, and with almost surgical precision, while others barely feel it at all. There are 3 reasons, and by the end of this, you'll see the math they don't want you to see. Let's start with what you already know. Prices are rising. Gas, eggs, rent, insurance, everything costs more than it did 2 years ago. The official inflation rate bounces between 3 and 4%, sometimes higher. Sometimes they tell you it's cooling. But your grocery bill doesn't feel like 3%. It feels like 20, 30, maybe more. And here's where it gets interesting. When economists talk about inflation, they talk about averages, the average price increase across the entire economy. But you don't live in an average. You live in specifics. Your rent, your car payment, your breakfast. So when they say inflation is moderating, what they mean is the average is moderating. Your eggs are still double. Your rent is still up 18% from last year. But somewhere, somehow, the price of industrial sheet metal went down, and that pulls the average lower. You never bought sheet metal. You probably never will, but it's in the calculation. That's the first clue. The game is rigged from the start, not by conspiracy, but by design. The system measures inflation in ways that don't match how you actually spend money. And that mismatch isn't an accident. Here's reason number 1. You spend money before it loses value. Everyone else spends it after. Let me explain. When new money enters the economy, it doesn't appear in your bank account. It appears somewhere else first, usually in the financial system. Banks, corporations, investors, asset holders. They get access to that money before prices rise. You get access after. This is called the Cantillon effect, named after an economist in the 1700s who noticed that whoever receives new money first benefits the most because they can spend it while prices are still low. By the time that money trickles down to wages, to your paycheck, to your household, prices have already adjusted. Think about the pandemic. Trillions of dollars were created. Central banks expanded their balance sheets. Governments issued stimulus. And where did that money go first? It went into bonds. It went into corporate credit facilities. It went into asset purchases. Stock prices surged. Real estate exploded. People who owned assets got wealthier overnight, not because they worked harder, because they were closer to the money spigot. You, meanwhile, got a $1,200 check, maybe 2. And by the time you spent it, rent was already climbing. Groceries were already more expensive. The inflation had already started. But your paycheck hadn't caught up. It still hasn't. This is the core of why inflation hits you first. You're at the end of the line. You receive money after it's been diluted, after everyone closer to the source has already spent it and driven prices up. You're not participating in the inflation. You're paying for it. The people who own assets, who have access to cheap credit, who operate at the institutional level, they experience inflation as wealth. You experience it as loss. Same phenomenon, opposite outcomes. And here's the kicker. This isn't a bug, it's the feature. The entire monetary system runs on credit expansion, and credit expansion benefits debtors and asset holders first, savers and wage earners last. You're playing a game where the rules were written by people who don't lose. Reason number 2. Your biggest expenses are the least flexible, and they're rising the fastest. When economists calculate inflation, they use something called a basket of goods. It's supposed to represent what the average household buys: food, clothing, transportation, healthcare, housing. The problem is, not all of these items are weighted the same in your actual life. Housing, for example, represents about 33% of the official inflation calculation, but for most people, housing's 40, 50, sometimes 60% of their monthly spending. If you're renting in a major city, it's probably more. The official number doesn't match reality. It's an average, remember, and averages lie. Now look at what's happening. Rent has increased faster than almost anything else over the past 3 years. In some cities, it's up 25%, 30%, in others, 50%. But the official number smooths this out by averaging it with other categories that aren't rising as fast. Healthcare costs are up, childcare costs are up. Car insurance in some states is up 40% year over year. These aren't discretionary purchases. You can't skip your rent. You can't negotiate your insulin. You can't opt out of car insurance if you need to drive to work. Meanwhile, the price of televisions is down. The price of electronics on average keeps falling. But when's the last time you bought a TV? When's the last time a cheaper TV helped you pay rent? This is the second trap. The things you must buy, the things you cannot avoid, are inflating faster than the things you can live without. And because the official measurement blends them together, it understates what's actually happening to your budget. There's a term for this: shrinkflation of necessity. The cost of survival is outpacing the cost of convenience, and your income, which is tied to wage growth, is lagging behind both. Wage growth, by the way, has been running at about 4 to 5% annually. Sounds decent until you realize that rent, food, and insurance are growing faster. So even if you got a raise, you're still falling behind. You're earning more dollars, but each dollar buys less of what you actually need. This is why inflation feels so much worse than the official numbers suggest, because it is worse. The inflation that matters to you, the inflation in the categories you can't avoid, is running hotter than the average, and the average is what gets reported, what gets celebrated when it drops, what gets used to justify policy. You're not imagining it. The math is real. You're just not in the calculation the way you think you are. Reason number 3. Your savings are designed to lose. Let's say you've managed to save some money. Good for you. Now that money is sitting in a bank account earning maybe, 3% interest if you're lucky, 4% in a high-yield savings account? Sounds fine, until you remember that inflation, the real inflation you're experiencing, is higher than that, which means your savings are shrinking in real terms. You're losing purchasing power while doing exactly what you're supposed to do: saving, being responsible, playing by the rules. Meanwhile, people with wealth don't keep it in cash, they keep it in assets, stocks, real estate, commodities, businesses, things that tend to rise with or faster than inflation. In fact, inflation often makes these assets more valuable because as money loses value, hard assets hold it. So while your savings account loses 2% per year in real terms, someone else's real estate portfolio gains 10%. The gap widens. Not because they're smarter, not because they're working harder, because they started with enough to play a different game. This is the wealth transfer nobody talks about. Inflation moves value from savers to asset holders, from the careful to the leveraged, from the middle class to the top. And here's the absurdity: central banks know this. They have to. It's not hidden. It's documented, studied, published. When they lower interest rates and expand the money supply, they know it benefits people with debt and assets. They know it punishes people with savings, but they do it anyway, because the alternative, in their view, is worse: recession, unemployment, collapse. So they choose inflation. They choose to let your savings erode slowly, quietly, in the name of economic stability. And maybe they're right. Maybe it is the lesser evil. But that doesn't change the fact that you're the one paying for it. You're the release valve, the shock absorber, the cushion that makes the system work. So let's zoom out. What does this all mean? It means inflation isn't neutral. It's not a rising tide that lifts all boats. It's a selective flood. It hits the people who can least afford it first and hardest because of how money moves, how expenses are structured, and how wealth is stored. You're not losing because you're bad with money. You're losing because the system is designed around assumptions that don't apply to you. You're earning wages in a world built for asset holders. You're saving cash in a world that punishes cash. You're paying fixed costs in a world where those costs are inflating faster than your income. And the people telling you inflation is under control, they're measuring the wrong things. Or maybe they're measuring the right things for them. Either way, the gap between what they see and what you feel keeps growing. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Inflation isn't going away. It's baked into the system. As long as governments need to borrow, as long as central banks need to expand money supplies, as long as growth is the goal above all else, inflation will continue. Maybe slower, maybe faster, but it will continue. And the three reasons it hits you first will still apply. You'll still be at the end of the money line. Your necessities will still inflate faster than luxuries. Your savings will still erode slower than assets appreciate. The question isn't whether you can stop it. You can't. The question is whether you can see it clearly enough to adapt. Because once you see the math, once you see the structure, the game doesn't change, but your position in it might. If this breakdown helped you see the structure behind what you've been feeling, subscribe. There's more to unpack. More mechanisms hiding in plain sight. And the only way to adapt is to see clearly first. Hit the like button if you want this kind of content to reach more people who need it. And drop a comment. Tell me which of these three reasons hits hardest for you. I read them all. That candy bar didn't get more valuable. Your dollar just got weaker. And nobody's coming to fix that for you.